Well, very conveniently, during the break, we got the Supreme Court ruling that I was anticipating. It was a 5-4 ruling in favor of Holly Lobby, striking down the mandate, at least to the extent that it conflicts with your religious freedoms. So, based on this ruling, if you have a religious objection to being forced to provide birth control or pay for your employees' birth control, if that is against your religious principles, then you cannot be forced to pay for that coverage. Now, first of all, the religious aspects of this, to me, really should be irrelevant, because I think that you should be able to refuse for any reason. It's not up to the government to tell an employer in what manner he has to compensate his employees. The government can't tell me, Peter, you have to give your employees, you have to pay them with free birth control instead of paying them in some other form. They can't do that. I should have the right to decide. The same thing for workers. The government shouldn't tell workers, you have to work and accept as compensation birth control. You can't not have the birth control and ask for higher income. You have to have the birth control whether you want it or not. This should not be an issue that's decided by the government. And there's nothing in the Constitution that says the government could do this. Of course, the courts have been ignoring our constitutional rights for a long time, with a few exceptions. The only constitutional rights they seem to recognize are religion or speech. And so it was important to bring this objection on a First Amendment basis, because that's the only time the courts seem to protect our constitutional rights. You know, when the government requires businesses to provide health care coverage, particularly contraception, for free, the employees do not get anything for free. They get the free contraception instead of the higher wages that they would have received if they were not getting the free contraception. Now, maybe women are not getting immediate pay cuts, but they're not going to get raises. It's going to all come out in the wash. You're going to have to earn your free health care, just like you earn your pay. And so if an employer is told you must provide part of your compensation in the form of free birth control, then I must reduce the wage portion to compensate. So in other words, if you are going to get paid $10 an hour, but it cost the government, the employer, 50 cents to give you your free birth control, you don't get $10 an hour plus free birth control. You get $9.50 an hour plus free birth control. So the birth control isn't free. You lost 50 cents an hour to pay for it. Except the government, you know, makes you think that it's free, so you will vote for them. But here, in this case, the owners of Holly Lobby, which happened to be a corporation, but at least the court said it doesn't matter. It's still individuals that form the corporation. And they were very religious, and they were against abortion, and they didn't want to be forced to pay for abortion, and nor should they. But the fact of the matter is, you don't have to be super religious. The First Amendment applies to everybody, not just people who go to church every Sunday and who are very religious. So anybody who wants to claim a religious exemption to this requirement could do so. And that's going to be great, not only for companies, but for the women who don't want free birth control, who recognize that free birth control is a lot more expensive than the birth control you buy with the money that you earn. The most expensive stuff is the stuff the government requires us to get for free. So even women are going to be better off if their employers say, I want out of this requirement because of my religion. But here's an example of how this was covered on the news. Here's on Fox News Sunday yesterday with Chris Wallace. They're talking about the rights of Holly Lobby to, you know, express their religion. And listen to how the left counters it. You've got Democratic Congresswoman Xavier Becerra. Cut number 5.
If I own a company and I have strong religious beliefs, the government can tell me to violate those beliefs in terms of providing birth control coverage to my employees?
The government will not violate anyone's religious beliefs, but no one has the right to discriminate against a woman because of her own beliefs. And I believe that the Supreme Court will find that no business should be allowed to discriminate against women, and we've gone beyond that. We should also try to pay them equally for the work that they do that's equal to what a man does.
We're talking about...
See, first of all, what does it have to do with discrimination? They're not discriminating against women. They just don't want to pay for women's birth control. How is that discrimination? Not to want to pay for women to have abortions is not discrimination. I mean, they're not paying for men to have abortions either, right? They're applying this thing equally. Here's another little bit more of the discussion. Cut 6.
Protect a woman's rights to be able to earn the same pay, to be able to live her life.
And what about the owner's right to his religious freedom, his religious beliefs?
The owner has a right to his or her religious beliefs, but that doesn't mean you get to discriminate against women if women have different beliefs than what the owner has, and the woman wants to exercise her rights under the Constitution.
Congressman...
Yeah, the woman doesn't have any rights under the Constitution to demand that her employer pay for her birth control. What constitutional rights is he talking about? And this is not about pushing your religious beliefs on other people. Holly Lobby is not preventing any of its female employees from having abortions or buying birth control. They're free to take their paychecks and buy whatever birth control they want. The only thing is you can't force Holly Lobby to pay for it. And how does that violate the rights of their employees? And, you know, if the employees of Holly Lobby want to have free birth control included in their compensation, then go to another company that does. They don't have a right to work at Holly Lobby. Nobody has a right to demand to be employed by a particular employer. If you don't like the compensation package that your employer offers you, then you're free to sell your labor to another employer, right? If your employer doesn't want to give you enough vacation time, if he doesn't want to give you enough sick leave, if he doesn't want to accommodate, give you a flexible enough schedule, don't work there. That's simple as that. So if you want, if you want, your employer to pay for your birth control, then don't work at Holly Lobby. Simple. There's nobody's rights. The only rights that were being violated were the rights of Holly Lobby. Now, also in this argument, Fox, Chris Wallace says, what if you have strong religious beliefs? You don't need to have strong religious beliefs. You just need to assert a religious belief. The First Amendment doesn't say Americans that have strong religious beliefs. You could just have a very, very minimal religious belief. And, even religion, it could just be moral, it could be ethical. All of that falls into freedom of expression, freedom of religion, worship, whatever you want. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you could be an atheist and still say that it's against my religious beliefs and I don't want to pay for somebody's abortion. So this is going to be big news. I'm going to talk about it more in hour 2, because also, what does it mean about all these rules about forcing people to bake wedding cakes for homosexuals or photograph gay weddings? I think this is going to overturn a lot of that. I want to talk, though, a little bit more about this Hobby Lobby decision. And, of course, it's not really just Hobby Lobby. Everybody's got a stake in this. Supreme Court ruling about a half hour ago in favor of Hobby Lobby and their claim that they did not want to pay for birth control because certain forms of birth control amounted to abortion. But, I don't even think abortion even has to be raised. I mean, what if your religious beliefs say that premarital or extramarital sex is a sin? If you believe that people should not be having sex outside of marriage, if that is your religious belief, why should you be required to provide your employees with contraception if you know that the employees are single? In fact, Catholics, to my understanding of the Catholic religion, all birth control is a sin. You're not even supposed to use any of it, right? I mean, if your abstinence is the only thing that's allowed, right, via the Catholic Church. Now, maybe the Catholic Church is softening its stance, but what if you're a Catholic and you're like, I don't want to soften my stance. I'm old school. I don't believe in any birth control whatsoever. I don't believe in sex outside of marriage. I am not going to encourage sinning on my employees. I am not going to provide them with birth control. If they want to go out and buy birth control with their wages, well, I can't stop them from doing that, but I'm certainly not going to give them birth control and be a party of their sin. And I'm not going to, encourage them in their sin. Maybe in their perspective, that would make them a sinner too, right? But, we shouldn't have to couch everything in terms of religion. You shouldn't have to have a religious objection. Any objection should be good. I just don't want to do it. It's my company. these are the jobs that I want to offer, and this is how I want to pay. And if people don't like the terms, then don't work for me. I mean, that's how it should be. And again, if you're an employee, you should be able to say, I want wages. I don't care about free birth control. I don't want it. I don't care about vacations. I don't care about sick days. I just want extra money. The government shouldn't be dictating to Americans, whether they're employees or employers, what terms under which they need to be employed. The same thing goes for the minimum wage and all these issues. The government has no business sticking its nose in where it has no constitutional authority to get involved. But as I said earlier, for some reason, the government has used the Commerce Clause and other parts of the Constitution to get around our rights. The only place we still have rights is in religious freedom. So to the extent that you want to assert your rights, you have to couch it in your religion. And with birth control, it was pretty easy to claim that it is a religious belief. Other things might be more difficult. But one that I don't think would be this whole idea about the bakers or the photographers who do not want to participate in gay weddings, who don't want to photograph gay weddings, or who don't want to bake cakes knowingly that are going to be used in a gay wedding. And you should have a right. And I think this Supreme Court decision certainly will embolden and maybe result in a legal challenge to these situations. You know, it was Arizona, right, that wanted to do that, I believe, and the governor was, chickened out of signing it. But this court case could give her cover as to why it should be allowed. Although I don't think you need legislation anymore now that the Supreme Court has come down. Certainly, you would be within your rights not to bake a cake for a gay wedding. Although, how is it that the baker even knows? If I want somebody to bake a cake, I mean, does a gay wedding cake look any different than a straight wedding cake? I mean, unless you're talking about, the figures that you put on the top, you put two men up there as opposed to a man and a woman, but you don't have to have the baker put those on. I mean, you can just order a cake. You don't have to tell the baker that the people getting married are gay. Just say, bake me a wedding cake and go pick it up. And they're not even going to know that it's a gay wedding. Obviously, a photographer is going to figure it out because the photographer is going to be there. When he doesn't see a bride, when he sees two grooms, he's going to have an idea that something's going on. And but if he's just baking the cake, I mean, how many cake bakers are actually at your wedding? Maybe if it's part of the whole catering process, but then they probably don't care. This whole thing probably happened with an individual baker, and they had to go out of their way to tell the baker that the wedding cake was for a gay wedding. But again, I can't force somebody to bake me a cake. If they don't want to bake me a cake, they don't have to bake me the cake. I mean, that's freedom. That's what freedom is all about. You could decide you don't want to bake a cake for whatever reason you don't want to bake it. And it's not like you can't get a cake from some other baker. There are plenty of bakers who will bake any cake that you want baked. Right? And they'll write anything on it. I mean, you could say, what if I went to a baker and I demanded that he bake me a cake and I wanted him to write on it, something negative about homosexuals? I said, look, I want you to write that on the top. Could he refuse? Well, I think so, but I mean, the homosexual lobby would say, no, you have to bake any cake that anybody wants you to bake. Even if the cake, what if I go to a Jewish baker and I say, I want you to bake me a cake with a big swastika on the top of it because it's for a party, we're having a celebration here at our Hitler Youth Nazi, political party, and I want you to bake me this big cake with a big swastika on it, and I want you to put an Adolf Hitler right on the top. Obviously, can a Jewish baker or any baker for that matter say, I'm not going to bake you that cake. You want a cake like that? You do it yourself. You decorate it yourself. But now, at least the people that want to exercise these rights have a legal leg that they can stand on now, thanks to a good decision by the Supreme Court. I want to go and play a little sound. This is on MSNBC. It's the reaction of the Center for Reproductive Rights, Nancy Northrup. obviously outraged by the Supreme Court's decision. Let's have a listen to what she had to say on MSNBC. This is just, 15 minutes ago or so. Here, cut number 21.
Well, for heaven's sakes, it's 2014, and over 90% of women use contraception at some point in their lifetime. It's an important part of preventative medicine for women. So the fact that the Supreme Court today decided to carve out some exception, when it comes to women's health, is wrong-headed. It's important that women be able to have this benefit of the Affordable Care Act, which is that they can have no copay contraception to protect their health and plan their futures.
So what, they have a constitutional right to have no copays in their health insurance? Says who? And since when? And first of all, what does she mean by it's 2014 already? As if what? So we should have no more First Amendment rights, that maybe nobody is religious anymore because, it's 2014. There should be no place for religion in modern society. Is that what she's saying? That religion should just sort of be bent because 90% of women use contraception? What does that have to do with the fact that employers shouldn't be forced to provide it for free just because 90% of the women choose to buy it? But what are they being denied? They're talking about their lack of access. They're not losing access to anything. Here, she focuses on access to birth control in this next clip. Clip 22. Play that.
What's next for your group?
Well, we're obviously going to be looking for as much as a fix for these women employees as possible. Unfortunately, for the employees of Hobby Lobby, their boss gets to decide their insurance coverage and how they, are able to not have coverage for contraception. So we're going to be looking for administrative fixes, legislative fixes to make sure that they get the benefit that women across America have seen from the Affordable Care Act.
Okay, first of all, the boss isn't deciding their insurance. They could go out and buy whatever insurance they want. The boss is deciding how he's going to pay the workers. And the workers can decide to accept that pay or work someplace else. And there's nothing that prevents these women from going out and getting birth control. And in fact, to act as if women are being denied access to birth control is cheap. You're talking about women that have jobs. If they have a job, they can afford birth control. It's not expensive. In fact, I've mentioned before, women don't even have to pay for birth control. Just make the men pay for it because they'll happily do it. It doesn't really cost the women anything, especially if you say, well, look, condoms, I want to use condoms. The women don't have to buy the condoms. They can, but they could just, make sure the guys, remember the old expression, no glove, no love. Just, it doesn't cost you anything. Women have access. It's kind of like saying, what if my insurance company says, well, we're not going to provide, my auto insurance company says, we're not going to provide free wiper blades with your policy. Does that mean I've been denied the access to wiper blades? No, I could just go buy them. Buy them at the gas station. They're not expensive. What if my insurance company doesn't pay for my gasoline or my oil changes? Does that mean I can't get gas because my insurance policy doesn't cover it? No, I just buy the gas. Insurance isn't for birth control. It never was supposed to be. This is all about a freebie that the government wants to give out. And remember, you got all these college gals saying, oh, I don't have any birth control. I can't remember one time in my college career where birth control was ever a financial burden on anybody. On anybody. I've never had a date in college where the woman said, yeah, I just can't afford birth control. Or the guy said, yeah, I can't afford it. It's too expensive. All you had to do, guys are more than happy to pay. How much is a guy spending to take a girl out on a date, take her out to dinner, take her out to the movies? The cost of the condom is a rounding error in that bill. Nobody is going to object to that. Even if there was a relationship, if a girl said to her boyfriend, look, we can stop using condoms if I go on the pill, but I can't afford it. The guy's going to say, okay, how much does it cost? Here's the money. Everybody is going to find a way, even if a guy doesn't have a job and his girlfriend says, look, I need money for birth control pills. He'll go out and get a job just so he has the money. It's never a problem for women to afford contraception. This is all a political stunt on the part of Obama to try to buy the votes of women by simply promising them something for free. Right? Just something that they could easily afford on their own or they can push off on some guy, and instead they're saying, vote for me because you're going to get this freebie. And if you're opposed to this free stuff, well, you're anti-women. That's all this is about. But at least the Supreme Court, in a way, can put a stop to it. Unfortunately, they limit their rights. If you're a big corporation, you got to provide it. But if you're a small corporation, closely held, they've adopted the IRS definition of a closely held company, which means that half the company has to be owned by 5 or fewer people. And if that's the case, you meet the definition, and now you can assert your religious freedoms, which actually might give the small companies a benefit, because now they can offer women more money instead of birth control that they might not want, right? So it puts the smaller company at an advantage in the labor market, because now they can pay women more money instead of having to give them overpriced birth control that they may not even need. I mean, there are plenty of women that don't want birth control for whatever reason. I mean, some of them are too old to need it, right? So, they're postmenopausal. Why do they have to pay for the birth control of the younger women? And they're probably, there's some women that are abstinent. They just don't need birth control. So why can't they have extra money? Why do they have to have birth control that they don't need? Now something else that they want, they can't afford because they got birth control they don't need, right? This is why we don't want the government to make these decisions for us. We want to make these decisions on our own. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. We are talking about another decent Supreme Court decision, 5-4. So there's still 4 justices that don't care about religious freedoms, or most of them don't care about any freedoms at all. But at least religious freedom seems to be one that still gets some respect on the high court. But we're talking about the Hobby Lobby decision, which is really not just Hobby Lobby, but everybody, any business, closely held corporation, partnership, sole proprietorship. If you do not want to include in your insurance, if you don't want to include, no copay birth control for your employees, you no longer have to do it, right? And you don't have to be highly religious. Just assert the freedom. We all have religious freedom. We don't have to prove how religious we are. That's not part of the First Amendment. It doesn't say that you have to have a test. They have to look into your worship habits, how often you go to church. Like you don't ever have to go to church. And you don't have to be part of an organized religion, just any religion, right? If you have a religion, you don't have to be Catholic or Protestant or Presbyterian or Jewish. You can have whatever religion you want. And, and if your religious beliefs are that, marriage is sacred, or that people shouldn't have sex outside of marriage, or people shouldn't have abortion, whatever it is, that's what you believe. If you don't want to be a party to it, if you don't want to be forced to participate, if you don't want to be forced to pay for somebody else's birth control or somebody else's abortion, even though technically you're not paying for it, your workers are paying for it because you're simply paying them less money and you're giving them the birth control instead. But still, you're a party to the process, and you shouldn't be required to. You should be able to pay your workers in cash, and then you're done. And then if your workers want to use the money to buy birth control, well, you've got no control over that. Because that's something that they're doing, and you don't even know if they're buying birth control or not. I mean, how would you even know if your employees had birth control? I mean, they're not going to bring you their receipts and say, hey, by the way, here's the birth control I just got with your paycheck. I mean, theoretically, maybe if you knew about it, you might not want to hire people if you knew they were going to take your salary and buy birth control. I mean, that should be your right. But of course, if people are private with how they spend their money, you're not going to know that your employees are using birth control or not, unless they want to throw it in your face. But if you want to throw your personal conduct in your employer's face, and your employer is going to have a reaction to it, that's your fault, right? You can't say, well, I can do whatever I want, and my employer is legally barred from responding to my actions. I got Craig on the line. He's calling in from Tallahassee, Florida. Craig, you're up.
Hey, Peter, your analysis is reminding me of that old lesson that we learned when we were kids about how if you tell the truth, then that's all you have to say is the truth. But if you tell a lie, then you have to have more lies and more lies and more lies and more lies to cover up each of those successive lies. And it's very much the same thing when you consider the the competing philosophies at work here. One that says that, you should be free to do whatever you want. The other that says, no, the government should basically compel you to do whatever it wants. Very much like the telling the truth. You don't have to explain it in great detail. All you have to say is, look, is it your business? Is it your money? Is it your life? Okay, fine. Do whatever you want. The law can't touch it. That's the only principle you have to articulate on that end of things. But when you choose to use the law to compel others to do what you want, all of a sudden you can't articulate that very simply. You have to articulate what you want them to do, and then, look at Obamacare. It took 2,500 pages, and that was just the statute law that, of course, the representatives never read. But then you've got all the administrative law where the IRS and all the other agencies have to come in and write tens of thousands of pages of procedures and all this to justify.
Yeah, and all these, all these women's groups, they want to make it all about.
It culminates in the Supreme Court decision. Now, we've got to have all these dozens of pages of them, and it's all utterly arbitrary and capricious exceptions to the rule or enforcement of the rule, or, we'll let you, have an exception to this one, Hobby Lobby, because you're closely held. Of course, that's not a constitutional principle, but like everything else in this whole fiasco, we're just making it up as we go, and this contract.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Greg. All of this should be decided by the private parties, employers and employees in the negotiation process. If employees want to exchange their services for birth control, they can negotiate for it. They can go and say, look, I want a job, but I want to get free birth control as part of my compensation package. And the employer could decide, well, if you want that, that's fine. But here's, I'm going to have to pay you a little less. This is the deal. If this is what you want. People say, look, people have different priorities. Some people want a flexible schedule. Some people want, more time off. Some people, I guess, maybe want birth control included in their compensation. I don't know why. I would rather have the cash and then shop around and buy my own birth control. I don't want my employer shopping for birth control for me because it's going to end up costing me a lot more, and it's just going to impact my wages. That's what's happened with health insurance. Because the employers get the health insurance, it ends up costing employees a lot more than if they just bought it themselves. The only reason that they don't is because of the tax code. And so, maybe there are some people that say, well, if I get my birth control, then I can do it with pre-tax dollars as opposed to having to buy it with after-tax dollars. Maybe that's what people are thinking. I don't want to have to earn money, pay taxes, and then buy birth control. I want my employer to give me my birth control tax-free. Maybe that's part of the benefit that they think they're getting. But, when these women's groups try to make this a women's issue, again, it's not, because not all women want it. There are plenty of women, there are older women in their 50s and 60s. Why should they have their salary reduced, or why should they forego a raise so that younger women could get free birth control? There are plenty of women that don't need it. And maybe there are women religiously that just don't want to use birth control. And now they have to pay for other people to have birth control that they don't want themselves. So it's not about women. Right? This is about the government making choices that should be made by individuals. It's about a reduction in freedom. It's about a reduction in liberty. Our rights are being impinged. They're not being expanded by the government. They're being contracted by the government. Whenever the government passes a law and they tell us that, it's about, creating rights or expanding rights. No, it's not. It's never about that. We have maximum freedom when we minimize laws. We minimize regulations. So we had more freedom before the Affordable Care Act than we have now. Women had more freedom when they can choose whether or not they wanted to purchase birth control than now when they're required to purchase it. Because this is what the government does. It's a mandated purchase because you have to pay for it whether you want it or not, whether you use it or not. And how does that benefit women? It doesn't. But most women don't know that, right? The government counts on that. The government counts on the fact that they can give you money with their right hand and not notice that you're taking it out of their back pocket with your left, right? They don't notice that. They don't notice that they're being robbed, and generally they're being robbed by more than they're being given. So whatever the government steals and gives to you, in many cases what it steals from you exceeds the amount of stolen goods that have been given to you. But what the stolen goods that they give you, they do it out in the open, and they make a big deal about it. And there's lots of fanfare, right? And so you know what the government gives you. It's harder to notice what the government is taking away from you because it doesn't get all of the press. It's harder to see what's going on behind the curtain, right? It's hard. When a magician performs a feat of magic, you know, if you could see what he doesn't want you to see, there'd be no trick. But it's all about illusion. It's all about distracting your attention to create the illusion that there's been some magic feat performed, that something is materialized out of nothing. But obviously, that's not the case. There's no real magic. It's just a trick. And that's all the government can do. They can't create wealth any more than a magician can actually pull a rabbit out of its hat. You can't pull. The rabbit's hidden in the hat, and there's mirrors there. And so you just can't see where he's getting a rabbit because he can't make a rabbit out of nothing because he doesn't have real magic, right? The same thing with the government. The government can't create wealth out of nothing. They can't create economic growth. They can't raise your wages. They can't create free stuff just by passing a vote, by passing a law, right? They can't do it. But they create the illusion that they can by hiding from you all of the things that you lose in order to finance what the government is providing you. And everybody ends up being worse off as a result of these rules. Now, there was another Supreme Court decision out today that also went against the Obama administration. This time it had to do with forcing employees, government unionized workers. So I think these are public sector unions, which should not even exist. And in fact, even Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the hero of the welfare state, right, the founder of the New Deal, author of the New Deal, was opposed to public sector unions for many valid reasons. But we have them anyway, despite the fact that Roosevelt was against them. We have them. But now the Supreme Court is saying that they cannot necessarily force the government workers to pay the dues if they don't want to be part of the union. And the argument has always been, well, the labor union is negotiating on behalf of everybody, and therefore everybody should pay the dues even if they're not a member of the union because they're covered by the union contract. Well, I would say, well, I don't want to be covered by your contract. Let me negotiate on my own. But you're not allowed. See, the union comes in, and this is why I think it's illegal. The union comes in and they claim a monopoly. Once a business gets unionized, somehow individuals lose their ability to bargain on their own for the terms of their contract. Now, the union has taken that away. So how can you force me to pay for it? You're going to take away my right to bargain for my own terms of my employment, and then tell me, well, because you're bargaining for me, I've got to pay your dues? I mean, you took away that right at gunpoint. I would prefer to bargain on my own, but I can't. And now you're saying that because you're bargaining for me, even though I don't want you to, now I got to pay you to do something I don't want you to do? And the courts are saying, well, no. And, you know, most people, if you're a good worker, if you're going to work hard, you want to bargain on your own. You know the people who want collective bargaining, the people who want to slack off, the people who don't want to work hard, right? That's who wants collective bargaining because they want to get paid more than they're worth. But if you want to work hard and you can show your boss that you're working harder than the average guy, he's going to pay you more. If you're productive, you're going to earn more. But in the unionized system, there's no incentive to be more productive than anybody else, because there's no reward. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to create a situation where employees are free to loaf off and do as little work as possible and not be punished by it. Without the unions, there is a motivation for workers to be as productive as possible because they'll be rewarded. And if they're not productive, they'll be fired. But under a union, you can't fire anybody. So everybody goes down to the lowest common denominator.